In 2018, the cartoon community was beset with yet another Western cartoons are ruined forever wail, when Rise of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles was introduced, and truly would only ruin such a great, famous franchise by daring to be comedic and goofy.
Good thing I remember that heat makes things rise.
First we went this way, and then, we went that way.
I think we turned left.
Was it down? Come on.
Those monsters. How dare they reboot this series, which has been rebooted like 10 times already? And I know some fans are gonna combat that with, aha, you've proven our point. The 80s series isn't very good. Even the creators disliked how kiddie it was. Apparently also a standing theory for why the 80s Turtles get so relentlessly mocked in Turtles Forever. Okay, you don't think it's feasibly possible to make a better comedy than the 80s show? However, I can't say that I myself was much better, as I too was ambivalent at the announcement of a new series, for pretty much similar reasons. I was a fan of the 2012 CGI series, which concluded in 2017, and Rise would premiere less than a year later. We were not ready, we were still grieving. As is often the attitude toward reboots of beloved things, I resented its existence on principle, because it felt like Nickelodeon was trying to hurry up and move on from the previous series as though it never existed, maybe because of how frequently dark and violent it got, and it needed to cleanse its image with something more child-friendly. Which is not necessarily untrue, but the CGI series went through the exact same thing. People hated the look of these turtles when it first started, and they complained excessively loudly that April was a teenager. And I can only imagine what it was like for the 2003 viewers when Shredder was revealed to be in. The cartoon community does tend to over-revere and hoard its darker syndicated series, because you never know when the younger-oriented studios are going to take the chance again, or inexplicably axe the ones that do exist for no good reason whatsoever. But of course, the big critique that has huddled around this series like a noxious cloud is constantly comparing it to Teen Titans Go. Now, broadly, they are technically both comedic and fun series that are tonally jarring when put alongside their darker and more dramatically toned predecessors that they themselves were not completely devoid of comedy, often in the form of anime-esque exaggerations, and not even completely by accident, because quite a number of the crew that worked on the original Teen Titans would go on to work on the CGI TMNT series. More specifically, Rise does adapt the half-episode format and embraces the slightly more slice-of-lifey, absurdist tone to many of its episodes. But certainly not to the point where characters are literally dying every other episode. And I'm not denying the very strong likelihood that the studio specifically wanted something TTG-like when rebooting the series. Likely, but not confirmed, pushing for the comedy harder than even the creators necessarily wanted. But what I hope is bleedingly obvious is the difference in production, which instantly nullifies 90% of comparisons. Yes, it is more of a comedy, but it is also still an action show. And besides, 2012 already did a chibi-fied imitation. The premiere finally aired, and, the characters do seem a bit different than usual. Raph is the leader, Leo is the funny one, Donnie is amazing. What is this universe? One of the silliest exaggerated points of early criticism was that all of the turtles had the same personality, which is not remotely true, but what is understandable is that if one just watched the premiere, between New April, New Splinter, New Baddie Baron Draxum, the Hidden City, the Mystic Weapons, and showing off how cool their animation style was, which it absolutely is, there is so much new being thrown at you rapid fire that the unique characteristics of the four can get lost. They are also moving largely as a unit in the premiere. To me, the CGI series has one of the best premieres of anything ever, which aired exactly 10 years to the day I upload this video, hopefully, maybe, in being able to establish all of its lore from the ground up and take its time to give each turtle distinct characterizing moments.
That dude, he had a brain!
We all have brains, Mikey.
In our chests?
No, Mikey, not in our chests.
But that also helps when you had a 40-minute premiere. I would say that Episode 7 Bugbusters works well enough as an alternate premiere, but one that focuses much more on the brothers, giving a better sense of their new personalities and distinctions.
You're just trying to flatter me with the truth, and I love it.
I'm so sweet, baby. Come get me.
If only one of us had seen that coming. You are a poor winner, Leo.
Even the episode right after the premiere, Origami Tsunami, does a perfectly good job. And that's when we first get introduced to the foot. These guys are Pinky and the Brain. However, another and slightly more significant pushback was the series changing certain aspects of the lore that TTG fans might consider sacred. Was it the red bandana thing? Did you make him later because of the red bandana thing? And there's a legit question on why they would choose to go with this decision. Creator Andy Siriano was, amongst other things, a character designer for the new Mickey Mouse shorts. Some things make a lot of sense now. And creator Ant Ward was a producer for the entirety of the 2012 run. And I think that for someone who was involved with that series and clearly loves the franchise overall, 2012 was so good at being a well-executed mesh of everything TMNT that came before, from the darker comic origins to the 10-season-long toy commercial. No rock shows, but Rise took care of that. Then it felt like they had already completed a really good straight version of the Turtles, and now the only way to go was somewhere completely different, and might as well bring back 2D animation in the meantime. Sure, there were still some questionable liberties taken in interpretation, but there's also plenty of consistencies with prior versions. Mikey's still the fun-loving little brother, Donnie still does machines, Raph is still a punch-first, ask-questions-later bruiser, and Leo is more adept at strategy and assesses a situation faster than anyone else. And particularly like 2012 Leo, he's a massive dork with a tendency for one-liners who thinks that he's cooler and funnier than he is. But
if you ask them to describe a Ninja Turtle, the description for Leo is, Leo's the leader. A character trait of just being the leader isn't really a character trait, it's a job responsibility.
This is a very odd take, because I'm sure fans can and have made many a character analysis of why Classic Leo is actually a very good and complex character, especially in the 2003 and even 2012 series. It's merely that he slightly has a more subdued personality in comparison to the others, and calling him the leader is just the fastest way to describe him. And even so, he still gets to be the main character the bulk of the time. Still, it is an intriguing question to think how their conduct and their personalities would develop differently depending on the roles that would have been placed on them. This ties into the other fresh take of Rise, that each of the turtles is a different species, where because Raph is a snapping turtle, was just kind of assumedly the leader because he was literally the biggest. The creators say that this is Leo unburdened by the role of leadership, a character who is clever and talented, but also has such an insecurity complex that he needs to build up his confidence through constant self-praise, which naturally comes across as arrogant, so no one wants to encourage him, resulting in a lack of external validation.
How come nobody trusts me? None of you guys have any faith in me. Why?
That he has to compensate for by congratulating himself. Quite the vicious cycle he's inflicted upon himself.
Not the dancing, anything but the dancing.
Even if Leo is not my favorite of the four, mostly because of the overexposure of Ben Schwartz's Blue characters, but what makes him more than just a clone of 2003 Mikey
Battle Nexus champion
is his often understated moments of being the most sensible and supportive of the group.
You went out on your own when you were his age. You know how savage Raph gets when he's alone? He'll totally lose it if we don't find him fast.
Laying a believable foundation for him to upgrade to leader one day. But it's also ominous for Raph, who's actually quite a good leader in this version. Well, he's not exactly an idea guy, but he puts in maximum effort to protect his family. Raph's signature AMV song would be Surface Pressure. But then, how could this Raph turn into the bitter, angry loner? Well, having his efforts being disregarded by unceremoniously kicking him off the throne might do it. I did think it was funny to see in Season 1 that famously loner Raph is so terrified to be alone that he mentally devolves.
Raph! Alone!
But this actually kinda makes some sense given how often loner Raph makes really stupid decisions when the others aren't there to check him.
Every single time. I just get into more trouble and my brothers have to bail me out.
It's true, every time.
But by Season 2, he's already going on away missions on his own, but not intentionally. The others are just not meeting up with him because they're not as disciplined as him.
I can't trust you to do simple stuff, like show up for a mission and not eat poison!
Which actually does coincide to multiple sentiments of classic Raph where he insists that the others aren't as good as him.
I'm the only one who takes training seriously. The rest of them are just goofing off all the time.
Stop eating the poison!
Thing is, the Leo take of not wanting to be defined by his job makes way more sense if you're talking about Donnie, who rarely ever gets characterized much further than does machines. and even with added attributes, is mostly still relegated to the background, something the series is much more successful in addressing because this is easily the best Donnie that TMNT has ever had IDW somewhat withstanding. I have repeatedly stated that my favorite character type is snarky, intelligent badasses, and next to Senku, Karma, and Peridot, no other character has fitted that criteria as perfectly as Rise's Donnie. And I knew he would pretty much from the start, not only because out of everyone, his drier sense of humor made him stand out in the beginning more than the others, but they also did what I had been waiting for these guys to do with Donnie forever. Give Donnie a techno bow staff. It drove me crazy in the CGI series that multiple times Donnie complained about using a wooden stick, and the only amendment he made to it was to duct tape a missile to it. I'll leave it to others to talk about his neurodivergent coding, which I don't really have a lot of background to discuss, but what is consistent is that he's not prone to over displays of emotion, but that's not the same as not having emotion, and either because of cleanliness or just not prone to physical contact, he often uses a metal extension, not just for fighting, but also as a replacement for showing a physical affection. This is also the first time that a show has given him a proper arc. And by that I mean an abbreviated but relevant struggle. Given the series' emphasis on mystic magic stuff, naturally the science guy has a bit of a bone to pick with that.
It is maddening to finally come upon something you do not understand, especially when your dum-dum brothers totally do and then wave their dum-dum weapons in their dum-dum hands all the dum-dum time.
Which comes to a very satisfying conclusion in the finale. Except that he's fine with the mystic library, but it might be just because it's a library. It wouldn't surprise me if the creators said that Donnie was a particular focus for this series, having maybe the largest number of standalone episodes and the most consistently funny of the lot.
I told you guys I was the funniest.
Which is so karmically cathartic to finally see Donnie being given some decent attention. While he's constantly the weakest fighter, but for the sheer amount of stuff that he's built, hacked, disarmed, or synthesized, as a character he way too often just gets relegated to background tech support. I was so grateful when he finally was able to stand up for himself for a whole 3 seconds.
Try harder? I always have to find the solution!
This Donnie is the Donnie that is finally standing up for himself, to make up for all of the pre-incarnation's avalanche of nerd put-downs or even just neglect, including from the writers, acknowledging that he is actually just as much of a badass and owning it. This does manifest in him crossing over multiple personal boundaries under the impression that his intelligence means that he knows better than the others, but he's immature and flawed like they all are. But the biggest sacrilege was turning the wise and gentle Splinter into a lazy, neglectful couch potato. The closest we get to the TTG assholeization comparison being realized. However, Splinter's depiction was a risk that would eventually pay off very well, with the unique take on the character that maybe spending your life as a kick-ass martial artist, amongst other things, and then suddenly turning into a rat one day, maybe it's understandable that you're occasionally a little depressed about that.
It probably would have been cooler if you were a tiger or something.
Which has caused an emotional wall between him and his sons to the point where he just calls them by their colors and they're going on errands just to get a hug from him. And at first his training is just them watching kung fu movies, for multiple reasons. And then he's shocked in the season 1 finale that they're not ready yet. But he does start getting closer and more involved during the season.
But I never lied about wanting to spend time with you. I would not have brought you here if I did not.
And Splinter's journey and evolution is pretty much the structure of the narrative for the series as it stands. In Season 1, every time they are confronted by the Foot, they are gathering pieces of what they call the Dark Armor, and it's quickly apparent that they are talking about Shredder, who in this series is more of a demonic entity, a creature that is the Hamato clan's mission to prevent from being resurrected, which Splinter didn't exactly pay the closest attention to. Also, they worship the Shredder, and their foot soldiers are literally origami paper ninjas. I still love that. If I was to give newbies a recommended episodes list, the absolute must would include the handful of plot-relevant episodes with the Foot. Yes, the episodics are more hit and miss, which is kind of just the nature of episodic shows, but to give you an impression of where I sit, if you were to go on Tiermaker and look for a community ranking of episodes of Rise, the ranking would resemble a circle. There's a lot in the middle, not a lot on the top and bottom. I am the opposite of that. My ranking looks closer to into an hourglass. There's a lot on top, and there's a lot on the bottom. The bottoms are not garbage though, just my least favorites that I don't tend to rewatch. Every episode will still have visually impressive moments. There's just a handful, especially toward the beginning, where some growing pains are evident. Scripts are weaker, character animation is stiffer, and they just aren't quite as funny. But when this show is on, this is some of my favorite TMT moments out of anything ever. Like, action-wise, absolutely doesn't need to be stated. I don't think that any series outside of Avatar has reached these levels. But that animation prowess carries over into the comedy, often at the same time. That snap, that physicality, and the distorted expressions. Even the moments where it cheats are used for great effect, and serve as a great contrast when the animation does go all out. Now, I don't really get why people were so against its designs, only guessing that it's just feels off that Raph specifically is so much bigger than the others. Maybe it's that the other three look almost too humanoid in proportion, like when they wear clothes, they basically look normal. Still, this design aesthetic is such a fascinating combination of Invader Zim, Venture Brothers, and Trigger, which are all great things. And sure, some of its episodes are just plain weird. Maybe they are fighting villains or the Foot, but they could also be returning a DVD before it's late, competing to see who's the best waiter at a demon restaurant, or an entire episode dedicated to 80s clothing montages, which is one of the best episodes. Oh my god, why do I love this episode so much? But what I really love in this series is the dynamic and moments with the brothers as brothers. There are entire episodes dedicated to them just messing with each other and being a family of pure chaos. Especially love when they focus on specific dynamics with specific brothers, where we get some variation on our usual pair-ups. Leo and Raph are less rivals in this one, and Leo is more of a supportive Lancer.
How far did I move it?
I mean, you wiggled the bumper a little, but your neck vein was huge!
The big brother versus little brother between Raph and Mikey has now morphed into being a little more overprotective and condescending.
Everything okay? You're okay, right?
Yes, Raph, I'm fine!
Donnie and Mikey are an interesting team-up, as one is more practical and the other overly sentimental.
Donnie, remember to express your feelings.
Okay, Mikey's Hug It Out seminar might have been the moment that made me love the series, if Turtle Dega Nights hadn't already beaten it to the punch. And there's this specific animosity between Leo and Donnie.
Ooh, give me 1 second. I'm getting a call.
Are you trying to get Donnie fired?
What? What? We'll discuss that later.
Which does make sense, as they are similar in a lot of ways, particularly both of them being pretty full of themselves. They're even frequently referred to as twins in the fan base, for them being middle children of similar size and temperament. And then, of course, Donnie ribbing Raph on his brain usage.
I'm not a scientist, but this is 100% just your guilt glands secreting guilt zymes into your central guilt system.
Raph is right. He is not a scientist.
Emphasized by this also being the series that is the most affectionate. In no other versions have the brothers hugged each other this much or told each other they loved them this much. Often in comedic situations, but sincerely quite a lot of the time. See, this is how you know they're not the Titans. There's still plenty of villain stuff, it's just that the villains tend to be secondary to the brother-oriented conflict. This is also why, potentially controversially, Season 1 is my favorite season of 2012. Yes, it was still technically rough and getting its rhythm, but Season 1 was all about the brothers' growing pains as a team. A lot of banter, arguments, and the episodes dedicated to them were directly addressing their flaws. So there was a lot of personal growth for all of them, not just Leo. And while this would still happen on and off, as the show went on, it became more about strategizing to fight the villains, fixating on external conflict rather than internal conflict, as it were. And go figure, it's an action show. But Rise is all just about them being brothers. This is also because the CGI series has like 1,000 villains. That's the other thing. The 2012 series was absolutely a cameo factory. Their mission was apparently to reference every single character that has ever existed in this franchise, on top of original characters, and on top of referencing every single horror movie that has ever existed. I appreciated that. I do think 2012 was really good in reinterpreting a lot of those classic characters, but it did get to the point where the series felt very overstuffed. And that is a strength of Rise. That it wasn't constantly calling back to stuff of the past, but that it was very much its own thing. Some would argue, maybe a little bit too much. The only cameo I managed to find in Rise was a statue of Ice Cream Kitty, also the original red bandanas. But outside of the main crew, and maybe Baxter Stockman, who is now Baxter Stockboy, who of course is a wannabe influencer, almost every other villain is an original creation. Like, I'll admit that its mid-tier rogues gallery isn't my favorite, but still there are a fair amount of them that are memorable, like Repo Mantis or Meat Sweats. But its main villains were all stars. Baron Draxum is an icon at this point. But then Big Mama is one of the season's best additions, voiced by brother f***ing Cersei, and also Amelia.
A lot of turtles. Too many turtles. A number of turtles that makes you think, why? Why turtles again?
I stole that, I admit I stole that, and now let us all take the opportunity to tell HBO Max to go f*** themselves. There is also the character of Foot Recruit, and okay, I'm just gonna reveal this because it doesn't really matter. This is Rise's Casey. Now, when it comes to polarizing character changes, I will not abide any grief given to Best April, because Best April is Best April. I love this teenage incarnation that's constantly trying different things and constantly getting fired, which accounts for her high range of skills, knowledge, and backdoor keys.
Why would you get a crane license, April?
And she's an adrenaline junkie, which makes all the sense. And I honestly think that a depiction of Casey where they start out as a petty criminal, or in this case a wannabe cult follower, that develops into a vigilante later, actually makes quite a lot of sense. Still,
she's different. She's
in the Foot Clan.
Yeah, but she's
in the Foot Clan.
But the series referring to this character as Foot Recruit for the entire series, only revealed to be Cassandra in the last 30 seconds, does her a disservice by slapping her with the Casey chain around her neck for older fans to drag her through the mud. When Cassandra as her own character is amazing. She is the funniest character in a cast filled with funny characters. And easily half of that credit goes to Zelda Williams.
Permission to vanquish his soul to the depths of oblivion!
I've been doing this all wrong!
I'll be on in a minute!
And whose visuals have such amazing Invader Zim energy. By the way, the voice acting, like, all over this series is aces, and of course it would be with voice acting deity Rob Paulson as the voice director. But this crew doesn't usually put in nostalgia for nostalgia's sake. Not like, oh, say, CGI's Bishop. You cannot take a character who is abducted and experimented on, prompting vindictive, genocidal hatred for aliens, and then turn him into the leader of the Utroms. Just because the suits you designed in season 1 just happened to look like him, you can't do that! But this last-minute reveal wasn't the plan. They had long-term plans for Cassandra that could have extended into several seasons, like they had planned for the series overall into several seasons. That got decimated when the series was cancelled, or hiatus, I'm still not sure. But either way, Season 2's episode count was halved, and its ending served as the series finale, which meant having to squish about a season's worth of story into roughly 4 to 5 episodes. However, all 4 of those episodes are absolute bangers, ending with one massive orgasm of a fight that most anime would dream of having, and aided by the fact that it didn't drag on forever. And let's be clear, fan whinging is not why it got halted so early. Or else much more critically reviled shows than this, like the Powerpuff Girls reboot, would not have been able to make it to 100 episodes, much less TGG. This is 100% Nickelodeon's fault, mishandling the series so severely that it was not remotely consistent in when or even where fans could watch it. They even messed up the toy rollout, the one thing you think they would care about. And that was all we had of Rise until this year when the movie came out. And it continues the tradition from the other cartoon series by opening with an apocalyptic future. Every single other series has one. And a plus and minus of the film was that it was made to be watchable even to people who had not seen the series. There really isn't anything in this movie that references the developments in the show or requires them to be understood. And the movie only centers around known characters, no series originals. Just a quick snapshot of the Foot, Hypno, and Worm guy. New viewers might get a little thrown at the mystic powers, but those get nicked in 10 minutes, so it's fine. And yes, we no longer have to deal with Couch Potato Splinter. However, there is one thing about the ending that has seemed to be either ignored or completely retconned.
Oh, and Blue, you are the leader now.
Wait, what?
Okay, fine, it is technically creator-confirmed canon, except for the fact that they never say the word leader, and Leo honestly doesn't act much different than he does in the show. However, what has changed is the dynamic between Raph and Leo, which now resembles more of their traditional butting heads, but flipped. Raph being the responsible leader, trying to get the others to take their fighting and their training more seriously, and Leo being the impulsive loner, just one that's slightly less angry. But now Raph needs Leo to get his act together. Not to mention some other things seem to have changed.
I know, Leo knows best.
Donnie would never say that. So when time-traveling Casey Jr. drops from the sky and tells him that in the future he's the greatest ninja of all time, it has the predictable effect, making him even more prideful and overconfident when he already has enough of a problem listening to and working with his brothers. Easily, this new boost of self-aggrandizing could have been from his newly appointed leadership position, but I personally think it works better that it's not. And not just because Splinter coming up with that decision out of nowhere doesn't make any sense, except maybe just as a wacky team-building exercise, but now the movie puts him into a periphery leadership position through a much more practical set of circumstances, because Raph gets taken prisoner when he has to save Leo. When he sees what happens to Raph, he basically turns into Leo from 03 Season 4, admittedly with a much more deserving sense of guilt. This is a pretty straightforward story where Leo has to learn to fight against his me mindset and do what's best for everyone. And what follows is a glorious smorgasbord of awe-inspiring money shots as the remainder of this movie is basically 2 elongated action sequences. Now, some reviewers have been a tad down on this movie for not having the comedic prowess of the series, which is hilariously ironic, but I know these people and those people are not necessarily the same people. But yes, of course there's more emphasis put on not just the fights, but the dramatic states and manly crying. Oh my god, I need there to be more action franchises with manly crying. And it's because for the first time, Rise can go at its own desired pace and tone, and try not to squeeze everything into 12 minutes. And this movie still has some fun moments, but even the gags that are there feel weaker because they clash so much with the rest of the tone. But its action has never been more top-notch. So, how exactly does this film work for someone who notoriously succumbs to action fatigue? Rise's action has never bored me before, and granted a lot of that was thanks to its 12-minute episode length. This crew has an absolutely fantastic sense of balance of Western animation pacing with anime-style anticipation, as well as inserting these bite-sized character moments that don't expand into full monologues, which allows for these hyperactive sequences a chance to breathe while giving them some amazing suspense to build up to the top-tier kill shots. But they always have those scenes where they have to take out the military, and I always feel like we could spend that time on something more relevant. Still, the movie in format did remind me tenuously of those Shonen Jump filler films that are all basically one big action sequences. That said, not only do I give the Krang massive props as one of the best one-and-done villains of all time, they are so terrifying, and those mech suits. The Rise movie isn't filler, which means that its characters can actually grow and learn, as shown by Leo given a very powerful arc, and likely the best show for his character in the entire run. But I do wish the other characters had gotten something similar. When the reviews bring up the lack of comedy, it's not just for the comedy's sake. The comedy was also in the form of brother banter, in other words, characterization. That's always been my problem with the TMNT movies. It always emphasizes only Raph and/or Leo, but doesn't let each of the characters have a significant moment of growth. Though this is the movie where we arguably get the closest. Donnie might have the most to do next to Leo, not in narrative relevance because he gets abducted, but maybe in screen time. In fact, most of the instances in this movie where they still reach for the comedy, a lot of that is specifically from Donnie.
If time travel were possible, future Donnie would have come back and already given me all the lottery numbers. Like we planned.
And oh my gosh, the escape pods might be Donnie's greatest invention. But other than that, they do give him something. Donnie is a soft shell, and alongside all of his rockin' machines and inventions, he manufactured multiple battle shells to protect his back. This movie is the first time they have addressed that when Donnie is made vulnerable for the first time. including a moment where clean freak Donnie has to immerse himself in alien goo. I actually didn't know about sensory issues for people on the spectrum the first time, so this hits much harder now. But then his big moment lasts about 5 seconds. At least he does get the final kill shot. Almost feels more than what Mikey gets to do. You'll have noticed that when I was talking about the characters, I didn't talk about Mikey. And it's not because he's not a precious cinnamon roll that needs to be protected, but in an odd turn for TMNT, he feels the least emphasized of the series and mutually in the movie. Mikey is usually a fan favorite for being the party dude and comic relief, something that of course means less when everyone's funny. Whether consciously or unconsciously, it was like when they gave more character and screen time to Donnie, they took it away from Mikey. But I still love this rash and energetic little brother incarnation slash family therapist as the eternal optimist and affectionate one of the lot. That also isn't compelled to break the tone and say something really stupid every 2 minutes, one of the advantages of being a comedy from the start. And like in the show, most of his actions in this film are being supportive of the others, while every once in a while, he makes a bunch of constipated noises trying to do the thing that his future self did in the first 2 minutes. Which does fit into his persona as the little brother trying to prove himself when considered not to be as equal of a fighter as the others. But even when he accomplishes it, it's hard to call it a character-fulfilling moment when he's just able to do this incredible thing that he's had absolutely no training in. However, it is moving when he spends the whole movie looking after the others, that when it's his turn to do something, the others support him. Particularly meaningful considering who wasn't there at the beginning and how that ended. And, small thing I appreciated, there is a possession situation during which nobody says the phrase, "I know you're still in there," and when Raph tells Leo, "You did it," Leo does not respond with, "No, we did it." The same sentiment gets across, but it helps to be just a tad less lazy with your scripts. Now, calling it the best of the Turtles movies is pretty easy for me to say. I have no nostalgic connection to the old movies, and honestly, most of the old movies just aren't very good. But even then, it's still kind of hard for me to say it's unequivocally better than the very first live-action movie, which certainly is dated in some places, but for how well they managed to balance adapting the dark tone of the comic with the goofiness of the 80s show, and its dramatic stakes, that movie still holds up really well to this day. So that's what we have from Rise so far, save for a handful of mini-episodes uploaded directly to YouTube. It has been very encouraging to see many other Rise fans sing its praises who also disliked it at first glance. But that's not to say that knowing that instantly cures you of your instinctual reboot retaliation. Seth Rogen's new movie has been announced, and it absolutely has a lot of potential. I certainly appreciate that it's animated, but yet again, I still feel that similar kind of resentment. Because I feel like we're not done with Rise. Or at least I don't want to be done with Rise. I don't want to move past it yet. And I'm so sad that we're not going to be able to see their vision for future seasons and villains and character arcs. However, I'll appreciate what we've gotten more than curse them what we haven't. But I'm also really irritated at the new movie Donnie design. But let's see if they break the pattern of making this movie only about Leo and Raph and hopefully gives them all some narrative relevance and growth. Anyway, highly recommend even for those who have not seen the series, and for those that want to but don't feel like binging the whole thing, I do have a recommended episodes list. And yes, a lot of them are Donnie-centric.
Just another drone, living my life like a robot clone. I'm sentient stupendous and my soul is free.